Hello, 101B scholars. I know you're working on your Rose for Emily essay, and I'm putting together a little rescue operation here with my fire hat, putting out some fires. I'm going to try to help you a little bit. Consider level of language when you do these essays. Words like, this was good, or this was great, that doesn't cut it. The level of language is just too low for our purposes. And what do I mean by that? Well, use your diction, your word choice, in a more scalpel-like way, in a more precise way, so that you zero in on some specific point you wish to make about, let's say, a scene in the text version was especially powerfully described, but the video version either omitted it completely or left out key details. Like the scene at the very beginning describing the house rising above the cotton gins and the gasoline pumps with, quote, stubborn and coquettish decay. Those are powerful words. You don't want to come across as somebody who is somehow unable to cope with the rigors of the literature. And if you simply say, well, I like the movie version better, or it helped me more to see what was going on, it reflects back on you as someone who invests enough in reading the literature end of it to do what you needed to do. So I'm just going to commend that to you as a way of saying, when you make a point, consider that you don't want to come across as someone who couldn't quite cut the mustard when it comes to understanding the nuances of a work of art, of the work of literature. Having said that, I'm not going to rule out at all that the video may have, in some ways, augmented or offered visuals that assisted the reader in better understanding the story, or even in some ways improved upon some facet of the story. But you have to be a little careful with that argument. Let me just briefly explain to you how argument works here, and we'll go into more detail on this later. You're not arguing in a vacuum, and you are arguing. You are making a point, and you need to back a point. You need to provide abundant textual evidence, abundant evidence from the video for the argument that you're making. And some of you just want to go with this really kind of bland, generic approach of, well, there were similarities and differences, and just enumerate them. No. You've got to argue your point. You've got to state it clearly. You've got to imagine an audience. So let me run this by you about the audience, right? The audience isn't me. The audience is a skeptical, let's say almost like a jury in a trial, a skeptical group of people that does not accept your position and at face value. You have to convince them. They are not against your point of view necessarily automatically, but they're not going to simply accept it. You have to think of them as, at the very best, neutral. They are not going to simply swallow what you're going to contend without lots and lots of evidence and lots of reasoning on your part. So really, you have to, I think in some sense, visualize this argument, this audience for your argument. What are the opposition arguments? One of them that I ended up putting in some of my responses to your drafts that you put on the forum, in some cases, was that, there's an opposition argument here. If you're going to contend that the video does a better job of providing visuals, well, that's the nature of it, and it's your job as a reader to really use your imaginative powers and your ability to respond to the language in the literature version to fill in some of those gaps. But the counter-argument here is that Faulkner, as an author, deliberately leaves a great deal of mystery in this sort of Gothic-tinged tale. He's not going to spell out precisely all the details of what Homer looks like in that bed as a rotting corpse, but he certainly gives you some powerful visuals. He's not going to tell you exactly what was said when the minister refused to come back. exactly what the details were about Toby walking away and never returning. So that is really a conscious technique artistically to leave a great deal to the reader's imagination. Did he leave too much? Well, that, I guess, is debatable. But you have to be aware of that argument before you just simply launch into the business that, well, yeah, the visuals, it's nice to have the movie. And I prefer that. Okay, so we've dealt with the level of language, just sharper diction, much more focused arguments. So I want to just briefly talk about these three. Ethos, pathos, and logos. These are ancient Greek terms and used by Aristotle to describe the nature of a powerful argument. Ethos refers to your credibility. You cannot have a lot of credibility if you don't provide a lot of evidence, if you don't develop the paragraphs, if you don't use language that is precise enough. And if you come across as someone who simply has certain biases, that's not going to engage a thinking audience. Remember, your audience is a thinking audience, a questioning audience, a rational audience. A skeptical audience, you need to convince, you need to stay on track. You get one specific dominant point. One. Now, that's difficult for a lot of people because they'll wander from point to point to point, and those points aren't tied together. You get one argument that you make in these essays, no matter how long the essay, and you have to stay with that, and you have to refer back to it. That technique is called echoing, whereby you refer back to it. And yeah, I can mention some papers that did that especially well, and maybe even post them. I think it's Socorro. I'm not sure about the pronunciation, but your paper on the daddy issues, as you called it, you referred back to father daddy issues and that kind of echoing technique really, really well. And that keeps you on track, keeps the audience on track. Pathos refers to emotional arguments. These lines, trying to be sentimental about an argument. Probably not an especially effective technique for these types of essays. We deal more with logos, which is the rational argument. That is, you've laid the groundwork, you've looked at the opposition arguments, you have countered the opposition arguments if there are powerful ones, you've become aware of them. One technique you can always use is have someone else read your paper and have them read it skeptically, not just in the forum. And send it to a lot of people in the forum. You are there to help each other because there's only one of me, for heaven's sake. And I'm feeling a bit better now, so I can do the best I can on this. But I'm just one person, and you are many, and you can create that whole support system if you engage with each other and do more than I say about looking at each other's papers. That way you're not just flying blind into this, and you run into difficulties when it comes to grading these essays, and you receive a grade back that really is disappointing for you and disappointing for me. So I'm going to close with that. I think we covered enough, but I'm really hoping that helps, and I'll try to put some samples out there of papers that not only the ones that I've put out already, you need to look closely at those on Moodle, but also papers that some of you have written so far and comment on those. Okay, enough said. Best of luck on this, and let me know how I can help you. Okay?